From the haters, got a nice ring to it. I guess every superhero need his theme music. No one man should have all that power. The clock's ticking, I just...
Welcome to Power Hour, at a different time actually than is usually on. We're normally on at Friday at 8 p.m, but we're taking a Wednesday slot at 7, just to be accommodating, I think, for the guest. And I think hopefully it'll be worth it. Normally what I do here is I will tell you a little bit about the guest, or make my best guess to put in my own words what I think they're doing. But I think instead of this time, I'm just going to hand it straight over to you, Aaron, and you can do your own elevator pitch. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Thanks very much, Eoin. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. Stop it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Aaron Gallagher, obviously editor of the College View, 20-year-old final year journalism student, and happy to be here.
That's absolutely perfect. Thanks again, look, for coming on. Hope we're gonna have an interesting hour. First thing I'd like to ask is just a very broad question. What are your experiences as being an editor, or being kind of almost the head of an independent kind of news organization?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like, one of the first things I said to our team, we've 40 or 50 staff. It's a completely voluntary newspaper. None of us get paid, so it's just, we do it through a passion of journalism. But one of the first things I would have said to our team is that we probably aren't going to get this opportunity again for a long time, to have this project where you can work completely independently. And by independent, we mean we've no political affiliation, we've no sponsors pulling us this way, university pulling us that way. We can report the news and report as we see fit, basically. So if we, once we graduate, we might go into INM, run by Dennis O'Brien.
INM? For those of us that are home, what's that?
Independent News and Media.
Okay, perfect.
So obviously Dennis O'Brien, he owns a large chunk of the Irish media: News Talk, Independent, the Herald, News of the World, Sunday World, that sort of thing. So if we go out there and we get a job, we're going to be restricted. We're not going to have the same independence we do as a student newspaper. So it's a fantastic opportunity, because we can just report as we see fit, and we're not going to have that level of independence again for quite a while.
Well, that's really interesting what you said. I wasn't actually sure. I knew, obviously, that for people that aren't familiar, say, with DCU or how it's run, but Dublin City University has its own, I assume they sponsor you and set you up with the printing and all the rest of it.
Yeah, we'd receive a grant from clubs and societies, which covers the cost of printing.
Okay, yeah, so the clubs and societies here in Dublin City University would cover, give them a grant so that they can basically run their operations, but that's it. There's no fingers in any pies. It's just straight up, here's the money, here's us supporting this again independent media organization.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, I was quite surprised when I took over. I expected to receive a few emails saying you can't report on this, you can't ask these sort of questions, but to be fair to the university, they've sort of just left us to it. I think they do appreciate the role of a newspaper, whether it's circulating to 200,000 copies or just to 16,000 students in DCU, how important it is to just objectively report the news.
And to have the Twitter account going. And what I was actually looking at, I don't pick up the broadsheet myself, but I will definitely have a look at the website, collegeview.com or whatever it is. It is that. It's thecollegeview.com.
That's it, yeah.
Great piece of a website. I'd urge you all to just check it out. At the College View on Twitter, and then there's the Facebook page, and it's all very well laid out. It's all very professional, and maybe that was just my kind of inkling. Maybe I was thinking immediately going in I was going to be selling student media short, but you've done a very good job, you and whatever other editors you have running everybody else, but to keep it to quite a high standard. And especially one thing I'd like to say is about the real lack of bias in any of the writing. We spoke a little bit earlier before the show about writers, and that's my personal favourite, and perhaps it's a little bit putting the blinders on, but it's really the only news organisation that I'll really give much credence to, aside from a few case others. But I was really impressed with how factual, and how there was no even kind of sly comments about even the way that things were phrased. If somebody was introduced, they wouldn't have pejorative, and then whatever the hell is actually relevant to the story. So it's a really good standard of writing that you have involved. And is that something that you've had to kind of build into the ethos of the company or the organization, or is that something that you're journalists would really kind of expect from themselves?
I think sort of we feel ourselves that we do sort of have a responsibility. We're the only student newspaper here. Obviously there's DCU TV News as well and DCU FM, but for the large part we're more or less the only organisation based in DCU that's reporting solely DCU news. So I don't think the credit goes necessarily to ourselves. I think it goes to a lot of also journalism students, to our lecturers, because they would teach us the right ways to report news, to write news, to structure an intro, and also stuff like ethics and how you should treat a subject, how you should report the news. So I don't think it's necessarily something that we've brought to the fore. It's just there's, I think, a universal standard of reporting the news. We all consume a lot of news. We read Reuters, we read The Guardian, we read The Telegraph, The New York Times, and we see
Some people are reading The Sun and Breitbart and The Daily Mail.
Yeah, sure, but we obviously all have our own news sources, but we I guess we pick and choose ones that would have a higher standard. So in our lectures we'd be referencing The Guardian, The New York Times, that sort of thing, and we'd want to incorporate the levels and the standards of journalism that they do into our own work, even if it is just at a student newspaper.
Yeah, well, it is a really great opportunity that the university's given you here, with the opportunity to, like you said, have so much control over what you're actually publishing, to not be, as you were saying, getting emails from this higher up and that higher up saying, no, you can't cover this. It's a little, it doesn't make us look very good. And I suppose while we're on the topic, I was chatting to a friend of mine, I'm not going to name him, but he's on the SU, and he'd be very, very heavily embedded with the SU. And I was mentioning that I was having Aaron Gallagher on, and he's smiling here in the studio away to himself. And he said to me, he's an absolutely lovely guy. And he said to me, he didn't say, oh, I don't like the College View. He said to me, something along the lines of, oh, the SU that's the Students' Union, for anybody who's not familiar. The Students' Union isn't all that, how do you say, keen on the College View. They feel like they get a kind of an unfair slating from you guys. What would you have to say about that?
I acknowledge that point, and I'm very aware of that point of view from the SU. This isn't something that's new. This isn't new information to me. Even when I took over as editor, this was something that past editors sort of pass on to each other. We do have this, I'd call it nearly an adversarial relationship, in that we have to report on the news, whether it's good or bad. The SU does a lot of work. It's there for the students, and we report the good that it does. But at the same time, we sort of have a duty to report the bad stuff, because as a newspaper, newspapers are called what's the fourth estate, and it means that it's there to hold the government and those who hold power accountable. So if we feel that the SU isn't doing its job correctly, or that it's failing the students, we feel that we've sort of a duty to report that and point that out, because if we don't, who else is going to do it?
Do you know what? It's really interesting, because in a way, this on a much smaller scale, the College View, imagine the College View is the Irish Independent or the Independent or any kind of public newspaper, kind of public national newspaper. They would do the exact same thing in criticising the government of Ireland, and it's a very interesting parallel to see it here. But I think you guys kind of get an unfair rap, as you said. You report the good and the bad. But I think, did you ever see the movie Nightcrawler?
No.
Nightcrawler. Great movie. Jake Gyllenhaal. I won't spoil too much, but he goes around with a police scanner and a big giant camcorder and his partner or whatever, and they run around looking for disasters that happen. Crashed helicopters, car crashes, home invasions. Sorry, that's my phone. That's incredibly unprofessional, but what can you do? Basically a kind of a if it bleeds, it leads type deal. And it was a bit like I was saying, there was a particular story brought up in the College View. Is it a week ago now? Is it 2 weeks ago now? The one about St. Pat's campus, and the not only giant price hikes were kind of almost a throwaway in the article, but not on top of the price hikes, but the quality of the accommodation that was being provided. And it was really one of the first stories that I'd actually heard get any kind of a great, not a great reception, but it was one of the most widespread stories I'd heard everybody talking about on campus. And it's obviously very hard for yourself to know what stories are going to pick up traction and what aren't. So I'd just like to throw it over to you to kind of, I don't exactly want you to defend the stance or defend the reporting that the college you did. You're well within your rights to write whatever it is that you want. But it's really indefensible what they did. What do you think?
Well, I would have been aware of this story for quite a few weeks now. It's a story that our news editor Hayley Halpin has been working on for, I'd say, about a month now. So this is sort of this has been a long-term project that she's been working on, an investigative piece. We got a tip off about the living conditions in St. Pat's accommodation, and the story basically is that since the incorporation, campus residents felt the need to bring the price of St. Pat's accommodation up to the same price as the Glasnevin one. So that meant they raised the price of the rent by approximately 38%.
About 38%, something absolutely incredible. And I know you're probably getting there, but they may have increased the price dramatically. They didn't exactly do much to increase the quality of the accommodation.
Yeah, that's sort of where the kernel of the story is. They raised the rent. It's an extraordinary figure, 38%, and despite that, the living conditions have remained absolutely appalling. Now,
can you give us a few highlights of these appalling conditions? Actually, that'd be nice.
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously you can read the story both on thecollegeview.com. There's a great video there, and it also went.
The video is terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't mean the video is terrible. It's a really good video, but Jesus, there's some horrific stuff in it. Just look up the College View, even St. Pat's campus or something like that, and you'll find it.
Yeah, well, I think the video pictures tell you everything. As
says more than words can.
Yeah, exactly. So especially in a story like this, it's very visual. So Hayley did a great job getting the video, editing that together, and taking as many photos as possible, because if you're reading this in print, it doesn't have the same effect as the video does. So yeah, like you said, the conditions were appalling. There was the one that stuck out to me the most was the front entrance. It's supposed to have like a card lock, so obviously if you're renting you have access to it, but the lock didn't work, so anyone could walk in.
Anybody could walk into the St. Pat's campus
at any point. So that's like the conditions, like we can talk about them later, but like
we can always, I have the image of the toilet in my head, and for those of you that either you can't look at it now or you don't plan on looking at it later, but the only thing it can be described as is a cottage cheese looking substance overflowing from this toilet. And it's, if you're kind of squeamish, I wouldn't advise looking at these pictures because they're pretty horrendous. But obviously, look, security, I think that's more the glaring issue there, would be the security.
Definitely. I
heard a figure, something like, is it 8 people to 2 bathrooms or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
And 60 people to 4 fridges and something something horrific. Yeah. So it's interesting to see as a media organization, the College View, it's, you know, it really wants to just lay out the facts there.
Well, that's it.
But I don't really want to call them ulterior motives, but is it not sort of on your mind while these pieces are being written and while they're being worked on, that they will eventually lead to some kind of change and some kind of improvement on these conditions?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely no bad thing. I mean, if I highly doubt that the price of the rent is going to decrease this year.
Almost never. No, definitely not.
But I think the fact that we have brought this to the attention of campus residents, obviously they were already aware of that.
But the students, the wider student body as well.
Yeah, and especially one thing that I noticed as well, who really took umbrage with the story, was parents, because a lot of parents were commenting on the story when it went national with the Independent, saying, I can't believe I'm sending my children here, I'm paying this amount of money for rent, and they're still living in those conditions. So like, there's no ulterior motive here, but if some change comes about, I don't think that that's a bad thing in any way.
Did the Independent pick it up straight from you guys, or did they have another reporter go in, or another investigative team, or did they pick it up straight from you guys?
No, they picked it up straight away from Hayley Halpin.
Okay, perfect. God, reaching places, reaching above and beyond the Call of Duty.
Yeah.
It's really impressive stuff. Like I said, you should check it out. Go to thecollegeview.com. Go to was at the College View on Twitter, Facebook, etc., and you'll find this video. I'm sure it's pinned to some sort of page. Really kind of horrific stuff. I'd just like to chat a little bit about, you mentioned other news organizations, INM, and these kind of giant conglomerates almost, and the amount of freedom that you're granted writing for the College View, and the amount of, you didn't say there's no advertisers pulling you one way, there's no lobbyists pulling you another way, there's no political affiliation, there's no government affiliation, there's nothing like that. It's all very above board. You have absolutely no reason to sway one way or the other. There's no profit motive, there's nothing like that. So it's admirable in a way. So that's really where the crux of the argument stands, is how big of a problem do you think that this kind of corruption and lobbying and political affiliation is among, let's start with a national scale and then we'll go on maybe further to an international scale.
Well, from a national scale, I think obviously we're very new to this whole journalism game, but it's very surprising to see the affiliations that certain papers do have. Obviously, if you've Dennis O'Brien running your paper, you can't necessarily report on all his misdealings and stuff like that. And
very true.
I've worked in News Talk and The Independent for certain periods of time, and you can say that what the journalists actually think of the situation and what they can actually report are two very, very different things. Obviously, they can't air their views in certain ways, but at the end of the day, the owners and the conglomerates, they're putting up the money, they're paying your wages, so if you didn't have them, maybe you wouldn't have newspapers. But
you wouldn't have the job, you wouldn't have the newspaper. There has to be some sort of a profit motive, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of new organisations, like there's one in the Netherlands called The Correspondent, there's the Dublin Inquirer here in Dublin, and there's these new organisations who see this state of affairs and they're literally running it free. They're not for profit, so they might just have a paywall or a subscriber base, so you pay €10-15 a month and that's their sole means of income. So it's just based on subscriber numbers, and it's not any owner or any person putting a large amount. That's
interesting. It's almost it's Netflix for newspapers.
Yeah, exactly. But the interesting thing about that is that you do maintain, like we do at the College View, complete editorial independence, which means you can report as you see fit.
That's interesting, because that's very interesting to see. It's a really cool way to actually run things, because you're letting, if enough people are contributing to this, then it kind of negates the need for, like you were saying, an overarching kind of a figurehead or a kind of a power source or kind of a source of capital like that. So you were saying that the Dublin Inquirer and what the Correspondent?
Yeah, that's right.
Be nice shining examples of some good honest journalism. Nationally, let's stay again nationally. What would be the worst examples, the most egregious and kind of most obviously present sources of bias in papers?
Well, I think the most obvious example is obviously Rupert Murdoch and his array of tabloid newspapers. He really has a monopoly going. And
which ones does he own? Just for
as far as I'm aware, he owns The Sun. He owns most of the Australian Press. And I think he owns a large percentage of B Sky B, so that's obviously Sky as well.
Okay. And you're saying this, my question really is what, obviously you don't know what Rupert Murdoch's agenda is, but seemingly from the papers, what kind of a stance is he pushing in the papers, or what, not specifically what he's pushing, but what is absent even?
Well, I think it's very I wouldn't read a lot of the English tabloids, but I think there's a common trend there where it's not very I guess liberal would be the word. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's conservative, but it's very tabloid is just the only word I can use to describe it.
I don't even want to call it right wing. I kind of know what you're talking about. Any newspaper that at one stage in its life had a page 3, those kind of stuff. You said it owned a large part of the Australian media. Is that, what do you mean by a large part? Is that just tabloids again, or is that like the Australia Post or whatever it's called?
I think it's mostly just the daily newspapers.
What's the tabloids? I think the problem with those, how are people still buying tabloids?
I'm not sure, like, why anybody would actually buy. Do you mean actually people or owners?
People. Why would I, Owen Tracy, ever go into a shop and buy a tabloid? Maybe not me, just any average Joe.
I guess you'd need to ask them. Like, I've worked in shops before, and it's a very interesting experiment to see the type of people who buy different newspapers, because you do.
Do you start playing the guessing game as they walk in, saying, "You look like you're an independent guy. You're wearing a suit and a briefcase. Got you."
Oh yeah, eventually.
And then he comes up to you with 4 copies of the Daily Mail and a copy of the Sun, and you're just like, "God damn it!"
Yeah, but to be honest with you, nobody really over the age of, I'd say, 25 actually does buy a hard newspaper unless they're probably a journalism student. It's mostly men and women in their 40s and 50s who wouldn't necessarily have an internet connection, and that's how they always got their news, and that's where they continue to get their news.
Well, you know what? It's quite interesting. I only thought of it there now, but those headlines in the Sun and I'm just going to say tabloids, those kind of salacious, just totally egregious, completely over the top, not at all based in fact, claims and headlines. It's a little bit like clickbait nowadays. You know, those internet headlines or those, not the internet, but those real day in print headlines have made their way over to the internet, and I honestly hadn't noticed until just right about now. I think the most horrific example is if you've ever subscribed to or followed or liked Occupy Democrat on Facebook or any of their media organizations. Now, their own political affiliations and mine aside, good God, they jumped to some pretty crazy conclusions. You know, if anything is even said remotely poorly derogatory about one person, say Bill O'Reilly, for example, I think he mentioned that he thought this black woman's hair was, I think he said it was James Brown hair. He said her hair looked like James Brown, and that he couldn't really focus because he was kind of entertained with himself with her hair. And they played a 60-second clip, and it was Bill O'Reilly, sexist, racist pig, should be taken off the air. And it was like, well, we just went 0 to 60 really fast there, and that was, I know the reason why you put that headline in, because you got my click. I mean, Occupy Democrat, you fooled me. And I think maybe that's just a little bit of a kind of almost a seamless transition over to media on the internet and the phenomenon that is clickbait. How do you think it's kind of affected the landscape and the style of journalism in the past few years? This kind of notion of clicks equals success and money and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting point in that comparing tabloid front page papers and their sensationalist front pages and headlines to clickbait, because I guess it is in a way, it's just transferring online.
It's not clickbait, it's like pickbait.
Pickbait, yeah. But what you find a lot of people do is that they'll just pick up the paper, read the story that they see on the front page, put it down, and you don't have to pay for it. But yeah, clickbait is just the eternal struggle of journalism these days. I mean, you see these websites like Joe.ie, Sports Joe, The Lad Bible, these sort of things.
And what's could you give your say more educated, better read perspective on what is clickbait to the listeners?
Well, clickbait is basically a story that's the sole intention of it is to get you to click on it so that the story gets as many hits as possible. The website can attract as many people to their domain. It brings up views so that they can get more advertisers, and the sole basis of the story isn't to inform your audience, it's just to literally get the click by any means possible. It's
to manipulate people's tendency to look, you want to read stories that are interesting. Mm-hmm. No matter that's the story you might be reading might not have absolutely anything to do with the story you want to read and that you're clicking on to read. It could be a million miles away from what you're actually about to read. Mm-hmm. But it's that notion of clickbait that's bringing it in. And you said that it was the bane of the existence of the journalist nowadays, or maybe even the moral or the ethical journalist. And that's one of the points I want to talk about, was ethics in journalism. And you see, how can somebody who's trying to just be above board and be that independent media, Dublin Inquirer, Reuters, what was it called again? The Netherlands paper?
The Correspondent.
The Correspondent. They have a terrible name. I can't think of it. It's 3 times it's escaped me. But how do you think it's possible, even at this stage in the game, for an ethical or a above board journalist to really make it in this kind of landscape?
I'd like to think so. It's very we go into our lectures every day, and journalism, it looks very bleak because newspaper circulations are down, people aren't listening to the radio as much, but at the same time it gives opportunities for new online platforms and organizations that like to do proper journalism. But no, clickbait is the bane of journalism, because a lot of graduates that come out of DCU here, we go into journalism because we think that we can make a difference, we can report the news, tell stories that are interesting and inform and engage our audiences. But at the same time, there aren't that many jobs, so if you have to take a job in
BuzzFeed, sorry.
Yeah, BuzzFeed is a good example, but at the same time, BuzzFeed are doing a lot of good journalism lately. But
really, you're on BuzzFeed's side? What kind of? I didn't think that the guy from the College View was going to be supporting BuzzFeed. What? Can I give a few examples? Well,
no stories pick out at the top of my head, but BuzzFeed is an interesting example because they receive a lot of criticism, and BuzzFeed, it originated just solely as clickbait and quizzes like which member of Friends are you?
Which Kardashian are you most like?
Yeah, but they've really developed, I guess. They have taken on a lot of journalists from other news organizations. So I know in the last year some journalists have went from the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and they've went over to BuzzFeed, which is astounding really, because
do you think that's a money thing?
It very well could be, but at the same time they could be buying into this project where BuzzFeed are saying, okay, we're moving on from this clickbait, it's still going to be a part of our website, but at the same time we're going to dedicate a lot of resources to long-term investigative pieces and good journalism, which is a good thing.
Do you think BuzzFeed's turning it around? That's
very slowly.
I'm gonna have to check it out. I don't know if I'm gonna take your word for it on that one. And you know what? There's another seamless transition. I'm doing it without even trying at this stage. I'm gonna have to check it out later. That's something that a lot of people, or it seems to me anyway, that there's a huge problem with people either reading one article and forming their opinion on the issue immediately from that, and not only that, some people, I've genuinely been linked in parts of kind of discussions that I've had, have been linked to articles where the headline was something along the lines, something very very helpful to their argument. One of those maybe even clickbaity article headlines was very strong standpoint, and then the article itself, it kind of fell apart under its own weight of a claim, and it fell apart with these kind of fluffy anecdotes and no sources and feelings and all sorts of stuff that really don't have much of a place in journalism, in my opinion anyway. So do you think, I think it should genuinely be stressed that people should really be looking through, I know I'm guilty of this myself. If I see something on Reuters, I won't look too far away. But then again, there are definitely people who might look at the Journal and then might not look anywhere else, or maybe look at a tabloid headline and then they don't look anywhere else from there. And it's this with all the, and I'm going to use air quotes here, fake news that's been circulating lately. I think it's really important that people actually go out and check their sources. And it's something that's drilled into us here in university anyway, that the vast majority of people really don't get the chance to do. And really, I'm almost about to ask you, what would be, is there any kind of a strategy that you'd even recommend to anybody for somebody looking for the bullshit, basically?
Looking for the bullshit. Well, I don't think you should keep your eyes wide open to bullshit, but you should obviously go for as many trusted sources as possible. But that raises the question, is there one sole trusted news source? And the answer is probably no. A lot of news organizations like to say, we provide the best journalism, you can trust us, like the Daily Mail.
They're not going to say anything else, are they? They're not going to say, we're all right.
Yeah, but I think you need to be honest with your audience, to be honest. I think if you do have any biases, you just need to be open about them. And your audience will appreciate you for that, because it means they can understand where you're coming from and the point that you're trying to make. But like, take the Daily Mail, for example, they apparently won Newspaper of the Year last year, and yet they come out with this front page either yesterday or the day before, where it has two of the leading British politicians, Nicola Sturgeon.
Legsit.
Yeah,
you're talking Legsit.
Nicola Sturgeon.
I actually, that was me glancing past headlines. What actually was the issue with that?
Well, the issue was that it was a blatantly sexist front page. I mean, Article 50 was triggered today. Brexit is the most pressing political issue in
Do you
Britain.
want to talk about that later? Are you well read on Brexit?
I'm read to an extent.
Okay, yeah, we'll chat some Brexit later.
Yeah, but the Daily Mail, like, newspaper of the year, and they have that front page, so that's not necessarily.
Yeah, I think you also have to remember that those kind of awards of blah 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 of the year are pretty bullshit anyway.
Yeah.
Pizza of the year, as awarded by the Greater North Dublin half of D9 area. What? Sorry, yeah. So we're the greatest out of these 4 pizzas that some panel of judges decided. So I don't know if I have much of a. Calling it the newspaper of the year doesn't mean very much to me, and I don't think it should mean very much to anybody else either.
No, but to get back to your original question, I mean, are you looking for the bullshit? Just the only advice I'd have to anyone is to just get as many sources as possible
and see what's constant. What's consistent throughout each of the stories.
Sure, but a lot of newspapers could miss something. Like, if you read 4 or 5 newspapers and they're consistent with each other, that doesn't necessarily mean that what they're reporting is correct, because one newspaper could have a better source and they could tell it right. So you have to use your own judgment. I mean, the point of journalism is to present all of the information to your audience and let them make up their own mind. I mean, people are intelligent. They can put 2 and 2 together and make up their own mind. I think you're giving
people a bit too much credit.
Well, you'd like to think so, because people don't want to be told what to think. People can make up their own mind. So if you give them all of the points of view, not just certain ones, they can make up their own mind.
I disagree with people can make up their own minds. I don't think people, for the most part, have very many original thoughts, ever. I think original thoughts are incredibly hard to think of. That for you to actually form your own opinion on something is incredibly difficult and requires a level of self-reflection that I know I personally don't have, and I'm sure the vast majority of people don't have either. Mm-hmm. It's very, very easy to hear something. I've said this on the show a bunch of times. I was chatting to a guy, 2-3 weeks ago now at this stage. We were talking about artificial intelligence and, different thoughts on that and kind of advancements in learning and teaching and intelligence and so on and so forth. But we were just saying that it's really hard to have your own thought. It's very hard for my brain to get to work and to get the gears turning and to produce something that is totally original, because the vast majority of what a lot of people will think, well, these are just my beliefs. No, they're not your beliefs. Your beliefs that you heard somebody say and you either agreed or disagreed with them. And I think in that way, a kind of a media organization, I don't really want to bring morality or ethics into it, but they kind of have an obligation to be as unbiased as possible and to not be leading them one way or the other. So to circle back to really what we were chatting about was spotting the bullshit. I know a strategy that I've heard talked about before was something along the lines of go to the far right, go get a Breitbart and go get a Fox News point of view, and then what you want to do is you want to go to the far left. You want to go all the way over to Occupy Democrat, and then you want to just put the stories next to each other and you want to see what's fitting. What you want to see. Again, like you were saying, maybe it's not a perfect science of finding what's consistent, because some people may have missed certain things. But generally speaking, if you can cut out the opinion and the drivel really that surrounds the actual news story, the truth is lying somewhere there in the middle, and it's something that a lot of people don't take the time to do. Do you know, while we're here chatting about media and ethics and so on and so forth, I think there's a huge issue with echo chambers in media. People's Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds, and surrounding themselves only with people of the same opinions of them as themselves. And I was just wondering, do you think it's important to surround yourself? Do you think people, obviously they have the right to make themselves feel nice and comfortable, but do you think it's smart?
I think it's a very dangerous thing to just be in that echo chamber, and if you're very liberal, just to read, Occupy Democrat, read Owen Jones in The Guardian, that sort of thing. I think, like you said, it's very important to, it's interesting to say to go way off to the right and find a news source and go way off to the left and find a news source, because I don't think you should seek out a news source just solely based on their place on the political spectrum. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that they employ good journalistic practices, even if you're way off to the left or the right. If you're crap at journalism and you're crap at asking the right questions, it doesn't matter what your point of view is.
What would consist of crap journalism?
crap journalism. Faulty sources, not asking the right questions, just not getting to the truth, being blatantly biased and unobjective.
Okay, fair enough. Perhaps on a level, I was kind of assuming almost that maybe in my head I was assuming we have the model journalist that is far right leaning and the model journalist that is far left leaning, and maybe I don't think there's such thing as the model journalist. I don't think anybody is 100% down the middle on everything. Just I think that's kind of human nature. So I think it was really just it was an analogy, maybe even a bad one at that, but to find the if all ceteris paribus, all else being equal, we can find what is constant and what is consistent, and maybe, you know, maybe you would actually find something that's the truth. But one thing I have to say about going either to the far right or to the far left is they are incredibly entertaining.
Sure.
Have you watched any Fox News broadcasts recently?
Just whatever pops up on
over the election. Megyn Kelly on Fox News. I mean, there's a reason that Fox News is employing the most beautiful women they can find, is because media has turned very, very quickly into entertainment over the past couple of years, especially with the election cycle. So is that something you're aware of, going as somebody who's soon to be going into the industry, or somebody who's been involved in the industry, obviously, and somebody who's soon going into kind of the INM side of it, really? My question would be to you is how did we fall into this entertainment with news thrown in media culture that we're in?
I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of clickbait. The people who are running news organizations a lot of the time don't care about good journalism. They care about the amount of people that are reading their newspapers, the amount of people that are tuning in, and the amount of people that are turning on their television sets. So if they turn this into a game, into entertainment, and this was prevalent throughout the US election cycle, it means that more people are going to tune in, you get more advertisers, you get more revenue, you get more money in your pocket.
It all comes back to money.
Yeah, and I think definitely, like, one thing that people say about Donald Trump during the election is that TV networks realized very quickly that this guy is pure entertainment.
He's gold.
He's gold, absolutely. And people want to watch him. People really want to hear what he has to say, whether that's good or bad. People like to get outraged. So they gave Donald Trump as much airtime as possible because it meant more people were going to watch him. And some people say perhaps that's part of the reason why he got elected, because he was just, and it's still here today.
He was everywhere.
He's everywhere.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He's like, even here today is right. I'm talking to Americans that are studying here. I think, just as a side note, I think university is an incredible place. I've met so many different people from so many different backgrounds, internationally and nationally, really kind of getting a broadening of perspectives. There's two things that you said, and I just want to break them down one by one. I want to first talk a little bit about regardless of whether or not the information is true, but getting kind of this airtime and this coverage and that leading to him winning. And then I want to talk, you mentioned people love to be outraged. I want to chat a little bit about outrage culture, if at all possible. So I'm going to try and make a mental note to come back to the outrage culture. But first, back to Donald. I chat about him at length on this show.
Sure.
Big fan. Not of his policy or his thoughts or of even the person, but by God, he's entertaining. He won by being in everybody's mouth and in everybody's ears for the better half of 2 years, and in a really incredible way. He was human clickbait. If you saw a story that started with Donald Trump or president or Democratic candidate Donald Trump or whatever it was, people were very inclined to click on the story. I still think that in a few years from now, there are going to be marketing lecturers who are going to be teaching modules on how Trump won the election, because it's a masterclass in social media and media engineering is what he did. And really, that's kind of what I want to know is what are your thoughts on how he did it? Obviously, look, I don't think either of us agree that it's particularly moral. But do you have any kind of insight on what he did and kind of how he did it?
Well, I think you're right. I think he manipulated and continues to manipulate the media in a really...
It's masterful. It's. I think there's no other way to describe it. It's terrible and deceitful.
Oh, it's despicable. But
it's horrific, but it's masterful.
It's extremely effective. I mean, you hear journalists and journalism lecturers talk about this. Donald Trump has absolutely changed journalism for the future. Journalists did not know how to cover him. One of the things that keeps coming up time and time again is that if Donald Trump tweets something at 4:30 in the morning and it's a complete blatant lie, can you still print this? Can you still report this? You know that it's not the truth. And if you put this in your newspaper, people might think it's true. So one of the groundbreaking things about the election was that the New York Times ran a front page that called Donald Trump a liar. And they'd never done that before.
That actually ousted a presidential candidate and now president as... Well, it's not really slander because it's true, but... They actually ousted him, so you saw some actual media organizations stepping up to him.
Yeah, definitely. But just Donald Trump, he's just changed things. I mean, like we said, if he says something like... One thing that I found amazing, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump during the primaries, during their debates, they both had separate fact-checking tools on their website. So they'd be fact-checking each other during it. And you sort of think you can fact-check as much as you want, but you're only... fact-checking the things that back up your point of view. It comes back to this whole view of an echo chamber. You can take as many facts as you want as long as it buffs up your point of view. So, and I think that's very dangerous, and I think that's why it's important to have news organizations that do have no political affiliation, because people need them. They need to go to somebody who's telling them the truth, that's not putting a spin on things.
But what about people who don't want to hear the truth? Because I know them, and I'm sure you know them, but there's some people out there who they just don't care. They wanna hear what they want to hear, and then they want to put their fingers in their ears, and they want to say la 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 la. I can't hear you. Anything that might make me feel conflicted internally. And I think it comes back to what I was saying about original thoughts. I think that if you hear an opinion and you say, let's say it's pretend I agree with this particular opinion, and then you start going la 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 la, I don't want to hear anything that comes against that, and then if you are faced at any point with any kind of concrete evidence that at all kind of pokes holes in it in a kind of a logical way, and you can see the flaws in your own opinion, and this new source of information outside of your own personal echo chamber begins to shape what was just you agreeing with an opinion into its own thought, into its own actual personal opinion, and that it's very difficult, first of all, because you have to first come to realize yourself that you were incorrect, that you had an assumption which you deemed to be correct, which was not. And it's scary. It's scary for a lot of people. It's scary for myself. It's very difficult to kind of come to grips with the fact that you might have been full of shit, and that not only that, you might have told other people that you were completely wrong, and you were confident that you now know things that you could have sworn and could have lived and died by the sword on to be true, were totally false, or even just a little bit false. And you have to realize there was some part of you that was lying, and then maybe even you didn't even think you were, but you were wrong. And people, obviously, they need to get out of the habit of the venturing forth into the echo chamber. Would you have any tips for anybody who is interested in climbing out of it?
Climbing out of the echo chamber? Climbing
out of the echo chamber, broadening up that Twitter feed.
Follow as many diverse range of sources as possible, really. I mean,
if you could give me 5, what would be your 5 sources to pick from to give yourself a nice broad variety?
Broad variety. Well, it would be very different, the news sources that I choose and some ones that I'd recommend, but originally I probably would have said the New York Times before the election, but to be honest, I do think that they failed in a way, especially with their poll. I was working with the US Embassy on the election night, and I think it was like a 97% chance of Hillary Clinton getting elected on the splash of their website. and then you wake up the next morning and that's not true.
They hadn't been looking at the Rust Belt.
Well, that's it, exactly. They're not reflecting all of America, so I probably wouldn't say the New York Times, because...
So the New York Times, you had it. You had your chance to be shouted out on this great show, and you're not getting it now. No New York Times. Unfollow the New York Times, everybody.
But you could say that about every news source. I mean, you could say that about the Irish Times. They've had a rake of quite poor opinion pieces, just explaining about what the left is and all this sort of quite fascist articles, to be honest with
left. you. Can we if we have time at the end after outrage culture and Brexit talk, we might talk about the left and right labels.
Yeah, but news sources, like, I think you said that you read Reuters a lot. Reuters are a news agency, so I guess you can't really go wrong with news agencies, but they're not going to give you a lot of analysis or discussion, really. They're just going to lay out what happened. So news sources, probably not the New York Times. The Irish Times are good.
I'm actually a big fan of the Irish Times as well. Yeah.
The BBC, they do some great work. The Guardian, really, really good. The
Guardian, the English one, yeah.
The English Guardian, yeah, that's right. And the Observer, obviously, as well. The BBC are good.
And what if you want some news from across the pond in America land?
In America land, what? CNN are fine.
CNN are fine. God, yeah. Donald wouldn't agree with you, would he?
No, he wouldn't. They're fake news, as he says.
Fake news.
Yeah, the New York Times are good as well. Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, that sort of thing. You can't really go wrong. But again, you should not ever tie yourself to one newspaper, because, you know, certain papers do have complete biases, so you need to give yourself a diverse range of things.
Even after listening to the show, we can get one person to switch over and, like I said, to broaden up that Twitter feed, to maybe unfollow Occupy Democrat, maybe just take a little step back and think, where are my biases? Why do I have these biases? Is there anything I can do about it? And am I going to do anything about it?
Yeah.
That's perfect. Outrage culture.
People
love to be offended. They absolutely love to be victims. They love to be the underdog at this stage in the game, and I really don't understand it. You mentioned people love to be outraged. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, people love to get angry. I mean, this might be me completely going on a tangent, but one small example I'd give is the introduction of video technology in football. This could be, whatever way you look at it, a very good thing or a very bad thing. But one point that I heard made, which I think is very good and very relevant, is that if you introduced video technology, there would not be half as many things to talk about in the pub afterwards with your mates, because so much discussion in football is based on the referee is an absolute so-and-so. How did he get that wrong?
That's really interesting.
That ball did cross the line. I'm telling you this, I'm telling you that. You talk about the Luis Garcia goal against Chelsea in the 2005 Champions League semi-final, and people still don't know because they didn't have enough angles for that back then, and it's a great source of debate. So people love to have a good debate about things, and debate is good, but people love to have a good whinge.
That's actually a really cool analogy, that people, they wouldn't have enough to talk about if there was no outrage. I think it's something that a lot of people maybe they find comfort in each other and with it, to a lesser extent. Okay, here's a very Irish example. You come in from the cold and you walk into a pub or a coffee shop or whatever, and it was absolutely pissing rain outside. You are absolutely drenched, and you walk in, you shake off the brolly, you take your hat off or whatever, and you look around to everybody else, just there's sympathy there. We all know, we're all complaining about the same thing. There's this kind of collectivism coming on together about us having a whinge about how bad the weather is. And maybe do you know what, perhaps this outrage culture that you're talking about, this people loving to get a whinge, it kind of goes back to a more, because it does bring people together. It brings them together, but and again, it's perpetuating the echo chamber, and maybe that's where it's come from. Yeah,
like you see the example. I'm gonna get her name wrong. Is it Katie Hopkins? Is that her name?
I have no idea.
But she's this British. I don't know what exactly her job is, but she's a columnist, and she's.
Oh, I do. Yes, Katie Hopkins. You're spot on.
Yeah, she's this commentator, and obviously there was a whole outrage about Ryan Tubridy having her on the Late Late Show, and how can you have this mouthpiece who's spewing so much filth, and she's giving out about overweight people and saying I should start smoking just to show people how easy it is to quit and this sort of thing. And it's like, right, obviously it's not a good thing that she's on, but my God, a lot of people are going to tune in.
Why do you think it's not a good thing that she's on?
Well, from a personal point of view, I just don't think that Katie Hopkins is a particularly nice person.
I think she's a horrific person as well. Don't get me wrong. I think she's terrible. But
Yeah.
why do you not think she deserves? Okay, maybe she doesn't deserve a platform. But I think everybody at the end of the day has an equal opportunity, an equal right to express their beliefs.
Sure, but it comes down to, like we were saying with Donald Trump, if you give a platform to hate, I don't think that that's a good thing. Different point of views is a great thing, and debate is a great thing, because if we all agreed with each other and got on, it would be a very boring world. But you can't give a platform. If somebody is standing up and spewing bigoted racism and stuff like that, that's never a good thing, no matter what way you rationalize it.
Now, coming back specifically to Katie Hopkins, I have no idea about her racial and or political biases one way or the other. You did mention something about giving out about fat people and perhaps an element of shame in the way she conducts herself. But that being said, I think you said a platform shouldn't be given to hate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you were in the fortunate position of being, and I think it all stems back to education. I think you're in the very fortunate position to be, or maybe it's not fortunate, maybe you put the work forth yourself, to get to a level of education in which you could obviously discern this woman's hateful, she's spiteful, she's spewing vitriol on air, and it's utter rubbish, and I can tune her out. I can maybe even be entertained by her go back and forth with Ryan Tuberty on The Late Show or whatever it is. But I'm not going, nothing, my beliefs are really not going to be affected by this woman.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be unwise to start drawing lines in the sand about what constitutes hate and what constitutes things that shouldn't be given a platform.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very dangerous to do that, because as soon as you start limiting the way people express themselves and the way people communicate ideas, that can lead to ideologies, and that's an entirely other debate in and of itself, which it could be related to journalism in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the very reason why there are all sorts of media sources.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there in that you do have to draw a line in the sand somewhere, but obviously Katie Hopkins has a way of reasoning and rationalizing her point of view, and it doesn't necessarily mean that her point of views are wrong just because I disagree with her. But at the same time, where do you draw that line? Is it okay to get somebody like, I don't know, David Duke, Grand Wizard of the KKK?
God,
would it be okay to get him on the Late Late Show?
What I think personally, and this is, I think it's probably not going to be perfect. I'm sure there's going to be some very, very, very smart person out there who's going to say, well, what about in this instance? But if we can all agree, as rational people, that there is some kind of formal agreement of what are human rights, everything from we'll put freedom of expression aside just for a moment now, but things like you have the right to be safe, you have the right to freely profess whatever religion or ideologies you believe, you have every right to whatever it is, to basically to live without imprisonment, or you have the right to freedom and all such sort of things. You have the right to life, you have the right to safety. I think anybody that's expressing any sort of belief, if anybody that's expressing any sort of opinion or stance without it actually impeding on anybody else's beliefs, or anybody else's rights, these fundamental rights that we deem to be sacred in one way or another, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, if we just held that as the gold standard of you can say absolutely anything you want, as long as you yourself are not encouraging or inciting anything that would impinge on these rights. And I really don't think that Katie Hopkins is, I really don't think Katie Hopkins is asking people to go out in the street and do something horrific and violent. I don't think that's what she's doing. Maybe she is, but I think the majority of people, a lot of people that that people would have an issue with giving them a platform, they're not actually doing anything, they're not actually inciting any kind of violence.
Yeah, but they are inciting this sort of mentality that these bigoted and racist views are okay, and they're normalizing them into everyday culture, and I think that's a bad thing.
You think it's a bad thing, of course, and you know what? I agree with you. I agree with you in practice and on an emotional level. On a principled level, however, I think you do have the freedom to express whatever you want, and it's up to the people that if everybody was getting their equal dose of information from everywhere, which they're not, we've already discussed that that's an issue in and of itself. If people were getting enough information from everywhere, they would have the capacity to think, well, this is just so far out of nowhere. This Katie Hopkins and Grand Wizard of the KKK, whatever he's saying, it's just so inconsistent with what I kind of have in my head as a rational kind of human being that I'm not going to count that. That seems ridiculous to me. So I think that really does prove how important journalism and media is.
Yeah.
How it can structure people's beliefs.
But do you think that anything should be censored then?
No, I don't think anything should be censored as long as it is not inciting. Let's say, okay, here, I don't think it should incite violence. I don't think it should incite any sort of discrimination, and I don't think it should incite. Those are really the only two that I can think of. As long as it's not discriminating or hurting people, I think you should be able to say whatever the hell you want. And that's why I don't think the Grand Wizard of the KKK should be given a platform. But you know what? Maybe Katie Hopkins is okay. Stunned silence in the studio. We have about 5 minutes, and I just want to chat a little bit about Brexit. Article 50 was invoked today. I really don't know what Article 50 is. Could you please take it away?
Oh, you're asking the wrong person there. I wouldn't know the specifics.
Okay, so the Article 50, pretty much, it just seems that the process of the Brexit has been set in motion.
Yes.
And whatever that means is, I think it just means that, formally speaking, that talks have begun to finalise the preparations to actually leave. And the vote was a very controversial one, especially among young people. Among young people who, they were the highest demographic speaking. I think the highest among the 65 plus age category, one of the very older age categories, the vote to leave was something like 60-70%, something very, very high. And the entire argument against that this vote, they thought that this vote was invalid because there was so much misinformation out there. And my question really is, do you think there's anything that could be done? Is there anything that can be done from, say, a regulatory body to stop this kind of misinformation? You mentioned that there was one person in charge of quite a lot of the English tabloids.
I'm not sure, really. I don't think there's one organisation, regulatory body that oversees the media in Britain. I think newspapers sort of have a right to say things as they wish, and the media, like the US election cycle, had a big part to play in Brexit coming about. You look at a lot of the papers, the Daily Mail, the Sun, all the other tabloids, and the Daily Telegraph as well. Like, that was very right-leaning, and a lot of their front pages were about immigration, which, whether or not you want to debate whether that's actually got a part to do with Brexit, it did become a frontline issue. And yeah, I do think it became
one of the ones, if you vote for Brexit, you are a racist, and vice versa.
But yeah, like, just in terms of truth, it's very, very hard to get to the truth. I mean, you see on one of the Brexit, I'm not sure if it was even a Nigel Farage bus, but on the side of it saying, we are paying so much to the NHS every year, why can't we put this into somewhere else? And it was a blatant lie and that sort of thing.
I understand, yeah.
But yeah, at the moment it's more important than ever to just have an objective press. But again, people don't know where to look because they don't know who they can trust.
Okay, that's absolutely perfect. Moral of the story, folks, whatever it is, whether or not you think that DCU should be providing decent accommodation for its people down in St. Pat's, whether or not you think that a nice non-echo chambery Twitter feed is a good idea, whether or not you think Katie Hopkins or the Grand Wizard of the KKK should be given a platform or not, or whether or not you think that if you voted to leave the UK you're a racist, I think it's very important that you go and you check your source. Don't even check. Do you know what? when you say checking sources, people kind of have this inclination to look up journals and scientific studies. Just look around and see if there's anything else that's saying otherwise. And you know what? I think that'd be a long way to kind of just getting rid of this kind of misinformation. I'd like to thank you very much, Aaron, for coming on. Absolute pleasure of an hour. Absolutely flew by, actually. I think we only have a couple of seconds left. Is there anywhere you'd like to tell people to go?
Yeah, sure. Well, you can find me on Twitter at Aaron Gallagher 8, or more importantly, you can follow us, the College View, on Twitter, or better yet, just pick up a copy of the newspaper across campus.
Exactly. You can pick up the paper on campus if you're a DCU student. If you're not, again, at the College View on Twitter. Really good stuff out of them. And I think that's the Power Hour this Wednesday night. We'll be back not this Friday unless I can last minute find a guest. Who knows? We will definitely be back the week after with a guest I haven't actually sorted out yet. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Broken, the school's closed, the prison's open. We ain't got nothing to lose. Everybody